It's the Blue Vote Cafe, a little bit of wonkish, a whole lot of fun. I'm David Schellenberg, along with Rachel Wigster. We are the co-chairs for Democrats Abroad in Canada's capital region of Ottawa, where the King has arrived.
His Royal Majesty. You went to see him, David.
I am freshly back from going to see the King, and it was an event over at Lansdowne Park here in Ottawa, and very much a multicultural event, multicultural dancers. There was a street hockey game. There was lots of different food from all sorts of things, and it was nice to see kind of the world coming together at a time, and a lot of times there seems to be more and more barriers going up around the world.
Yeah, that's true. That's lovely. I'm glad you were able to get over there.
And what have you been up to, Rachel?
Oh, lots of Democrats abroad things.
I see. I've been hanging out in parks, and you're
You've been looking at the King. I've been hard at work.
It's good thing somebody is. Who's with us today, Rachel?
Today, I'm delighted to say we have a fellow Canadian, Charlie Angus, who was a member of Parliament here in Canada for 21 years until very recently, and is now working on building the resistance. So I'm really excited to talk to him. Charlie, welcome to the Blue Vote Cafe.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on.
We really appreciate it. We usually ask our guests where they are in the world. We know you're in Canada, what state they vote in. That's not relevant. So have they lived
well, what
out
part of the
overseas?
world are you in? I suppose it's still
sure.
relevant.
Okay. Yeah,
I'm in a very tiny mining town called Cobalt in Northern Ontario. And if any of your Democrats abroad have ever visited Toronto and saw their massive bank towers, all those bank towers are there because of all the money that came out of our backyards. So we've got a bunch of holes in the ground, a bunch of green arsenic beaches, and but we're a hard rock mining town, and this is where I call home.
Right. Is that where you grew up?
Well, my family grew up in a mining town, so that's where I come from, and my roots. Our family were miners, and I love the people. It's a hard life, but I love the people.
That's wonderful. So tell us about that. How did you come from a mining town to become an MP in the Canadian Parliament?
Well, being a member of Parliament was not on my bingo card, as they say.
As they say.
I quit school at 17. I went on the road with a punk band, L'Étranger. Our singer of that punk band, Andrew Cash, also became a member of Parliament. So we are the only two members of the Westminster system of government that opened for the dead Kennedys and the violent families. So that's a Trivia Pursuit answer. It's a fact. And anyways, I was a musician. My wife and I were kind of hippie punk anarchists, living up in the north in the bush, trying to raise little children. And I got involved in what became one of the biggest environmental battles in Canadian history in terms of civil disobedience. And I realized I was good at organizing. And Jack Layton, who was then running to be leader of the New Democratic Party, he was really active and kept talking to me about running, and I didn't even own a suit.
Yeah.
But, the big difference between Canadian politics, one of the big differences in American politics is that we have spending limits. Right. So it was possible for me to run in a region which was bigger than the United Kingdom and win, because the other team couldn't spend any more money than we could, and individuals can spend money, but corporations and unions couldn't. So it limited the power of the bigger parties. So it let a maverick like me get in the door. And once I got in, I swore that we would never give up that opportunity to serve people again. So I came in with a very activist agenda and stirred as much crap as I could for the entire time I was in Parliament.
Do you remember what that limit was?
In the first election, I think it was $88,000.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Again, in a region that's bigger than the United Kingdom.
Right. Wow. Yeah.
So it's maybe 120,000 now.
Right. So you probably did at some point have to decide lawn signs or door hangers.
Lawn signs, whether or not, again, I don't know how many communities we have. I have communities that we have no roads, so we have to rent planes to get into.
Oh,
In this last campaign,
wow.
helping a candidate, we had to rent a helicopter
Oh,
because the
wow.
ice on the rivers were breaking up and we couldn't get to some of the indigenous communities except through helicopters. So we had to, so those are things you have to factor in when you represent the far north of Canada.
In Toronto, you can take a train
Wow. Or
or
a
Well,
bike
when
or
I
a
or a
was in,
walk.
bus or a
Yeah.
yeah,
bike or walk. Yeah.
yeah, when I was in Toronto, I was a 15-minute bike ride to two members of parliament offices, one on either end. And but yeah, it's a very different thing in the north.
Amazing. Wow. And so what causes were you most passionate about as an MP or what issues?
Well, from the get-go was the horrific disparity faced by the northern indigenous communities,
Hmm.
the levels of poverty, the lack of investment. I mean, Canada has a good reputation on the world, except when it comes to indigenous. The fact
Hmm.
that we had communities where people couldn't drink water, we had communities where we didn't have proper schools. I was appalled by that. And from the get-go, I decided I would just drop the gloves and go at it, as we say in our hockey metaphors.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Um, I got involved with some young uh, Cree First Nation youth who didn't have a school, and this is a country where down the road from where they lived, well, they didn't have roads. I mean, this was in the far north. They discovered a diamond mine, and they could fly in people from all over the world and build a world-class diamond mine. And one of those diamonds that they brought out of the ground, one diamond was worth $21 million at
Oh my
auction,
God.
but
Wow.
they
Oh my
couldn't build a
God.
proper school for these kids.
Right.
Oh my
So this
God.
young activist, Shannon Kustash, and she was 13 years old. She had fire.
Hmm.
So we started to launch a campaign that became the largest youth-driven children's rights movement in Canadian history. Um, and Shannon ended up dying very young in a car accident because she had to leave home to go to school.
Oh
But
no.
I just devastated us. But we formed what was called Shannon's Dream to fight for Indigenous school rights. That fight went all the way to the United Nations. And when Canada announced the 150 most famous women in Canadian history, Shannon was one of them. So that's a
Wow.
hell of a thing to have been part of.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Right. Amazing.
Canada's story with the Indigenous peoples is troubling. And I remember I was talking to
Yep.
one of our members who moved to Canada, and he sort of felt he was coming to a country so much better than the United States because there was no problems of that sort of magnitude, and then all of a sudden discovered the Indigenous story, and was really quite taken aback that he couldn't believe that a country that has our reputation has this bit of history. Do you find you have to explain how bad Canada has treated its Indigenous people to others?
Well, I think one of the things that's really interesting is that, we were never told about the mass stealing of children, putting them into the
Residential schools.
residential schools and the
Yeah.
horrific violence that was inflicted on them, the destruction of their culture.
Right.
But we've had a reckoning, and we've been on a very hard road over the last 10 years, but it's been a good road.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about stuff we never talked about before. Young people are learning things that my generation wasn't taught. Issues of Indigenous rights is now very much forefront. So what I take from it is that we are coming to terms with the story of the Americas, and the story of the Americas was the theft of Indigenous lands. And I think we're become a better country for it, and we're less, in this time right now with the Trump threats and Canadians becoming super patriotic. One thing I've really felt is that we're not as jingoistic as we might have been because we've learned that we've done bad, and we have to be aware that if we are going to be a model on the world stage in a time when democracy is under threat, that um, we need to keep in mind the fact that this journey between the settler and indigenous population has been troubled, but it is a journey, and in 150 years from now, it'll still be our primary journey. So I'm feeling I've seen a lot of progress, but we're not nearly where we need to be. We just have to move a lot faster, and that's just the reality of
Mm-hmm.
picking up for all the negligence that has gone on for so many years.
But that's a really interesting point that the fact that we began that journey and we have started looking hard at it has maybe made us more sensitive to what's going on now than we might otherwise have been.
Yeah, I mean things that people might have said 15 years ago in terms of blaming the indigenous people and saying they were lazy and blaming the chiefs. I used to hear
Yeah.
that all the time.
Oh
That
boy.
stuff's gone by the wayside.
Hmm.
The first time someone was able to use the word cultural genocide and not have all the newspapers freak out in their editorials because the
Hmm.
evidence was so clear that this was what the government policy was to erase the indigenous people from the land. Um, once we crossed those barriers that we had put before our eyes, it brought us into a different place, and I think it's brought us to a better place as a nation.
Hmm. For sure. So, 21 years as an MP, and then you decided to go on to something else.
What, you got a
What
real
led
job?
Yeah.
You got a real job. No,
Yeah.
what led to your decision to leave, well, that form of politics, and what are you doing now?
Well, I mean, again, my riding constituency was bigger than the United Kingdom, and we don't have gerrymandering in Canada. We have a much more bureaucratic thing where we'll turn over re, redistribution, redrawing of our constituency boundaries to a
Right.
group of three people that are not accountable to anyone, and they felt that the communities of my region were somehow overrepresented in Parliament.
Oh.
So they threw on an extra 20,000 square kilometers, hundreds of more miles, about a dozen more towns, which is actually impossible to service. You just can't
Right.
service that. And I
Wow.
felt after 21 years that I'd die on these northern roads just doing this over and over and over, trying to build at the Legion level, trying to build in small community coffee shops, 'cause that's how I do politics. So I decided it was time to leave.
Hmm.
And I felt pretty good about that. And then Donald Trump got elected. And I woke up the morning after, knew that we were in totally uncharted territory. So I decided to use the time I had left in Parliament to try and articulate the threat that's before us as a nation and the threat before us in a in an era of rising oligarchs and gangster regimes. And people just started to reach out to me from everywhere. I mean, nobody, I don't know, I've given how many thousands of speeches, nobody paid much attention, but suddenly I'm getting all over the world, people are calling me. So I set up
Ah.
something, it's called The Resistance. You can follow me on Charlie Angus Resistance Substack, where every day I try and analyze something that's happening in terms of the threat that's to democracy. And that's led to this sort of relentless touring that I'm doing. I'm going to community after community, meeting people, building this grassroots resistance. It's been very exhilarating. I'm really seeing at the grassroots how strong Canadians are in terms of their determination to defend democracy and defend our border.
Hmm.
But it's full out. It's I'm busier now than I've ever been. Um, and again, I get a lot of commentary now from across the United States and elsewhere in the world of people who are also saying, well, how do we resist? How do we stand up and defend the rule of law?
So, how do we?
Well,
Well, how do you answer that question when people ask you from around the world?
I don't think that we can trust our political leadership to do it for us.
Hmm.
Um, I don't believe that sort of the traditional political pundits, they either don't get it or they don't want to get it. But I think ordinary people do understand that what we're dealing with is a fundamental uh, break that there is no going back from. And the best opportunity we have is really at the grassroots level. People need to get off the couch. People need to stop doom scrolling. People need to come together. And this is the power of the boycott that we're seeing in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
This boycott has had a tremendous impact. We just had US senators coming last week saying to Canada, come on, let the healing begin. Well, listen, we're not the ones threatening uh, the future of your country. You guys are. But the
Mm.
reason they're coming is because they're facing massive, massive economic impacts that our government can't turn that off. Donald Trump can say, I want you to stop this boycott, but our leaders couldn't do that. These are ordinary people who've decided they're not going back to Florida. They're not going to buy any green produce from California.
Right.
They're not going to purchase anything right now because we are under an unprecedented level of threat. And this boycott, the last I heard is that the U.S. has expected a loss of $12.5 billion in
Wow.
tourism this year.
Oh,
That's a
wow.
staggering loss.
Yes.
And that has come out of this grassroots movement. So that's where I'm literally a number of days a month I'm on the road going to, working class towns, small towns, big cities, and the response is overwhelming. People are very determined to defend what we have right now.
I suppose the thing I wonder is how much do people honestly believe Trump when he talks about the 51st state and stuff? Like when I talk to Trump supporters and I'll say, well, he says this and this and this and this, and you can see in their eyes, they just sort of roll their eyes. They don't believe Trump really either, but yet they just sort of say, oh, that's his negotiation tactic or something. And somehow I wonder if he's really that brilliant that that's a negotiation tactic.
Well, I think that people who say Trump is being Trump are fools. We're watching judges being arrested. We're watching people being kidnapped off the streets and put into deportation centers. That's not Trump being Trump. That is the rise of fascism. That's the rise of tyranny. So when Donald Trump said he was going to break our economy and force us to beg to join his country, Canadians took that very seriously. So right now we got Pete Hoekstra, the U.S. ambassador, telling Canada to get over it. Well, we're not getting over it, and we're not a jingoistic patriotic people. We don't wave the flag, but right now there's a real anger and a real determination, and you have to look at why, Donald Trump has made since December well over 100 statements attacking Canada, attacking us for being the nastiest country he's ever dealt with, attacking our leaders, where his attacks on Vladimir Putin, until this week, there was just one or two comments negative. He's an oligarch, and he supports the oligarchs. So even when he said, the U.S. ambassador said, "Oh, we've moved on. We're not there." But, you read the New York Times and they're saying that his vision of the world is three giant powers: China, Russia, the United States. In that worldview, can't be an ally. Canada is not a trading partner. We're expected to be a vassal state, and we ain't gonna be no vassal state to the gangster from Mar-a-Lago. Not in a million years, right? And I think he just thought that we were going to be pushovers, and I think a lot of people would have thought we were pushovers. But suddenly, you're seeing this real iron will to resist, even though we are already going to take enormous economic hits, but we're seeing on the United States enormous economic hits, and it's insane. We're neighbors,
We're
so
the
many
best
people
customer.
best customer. I know. It's like, like we had the senator from North Dakota come and ask us to be nice. Well, we have a $70 billion integrated ag trade that has now just been blown up. For what purpose? Same with auto, same with steel and aluminum. Talking to people who work in doing bidding on big construction projects that won't happen for 2 or 3 years down the road, and they can't figure out what steel is going to cost, because half the steel that's made here is finished in the United States and sent back, and half the steel that's made in the U.S. is sent to Canada and painted and then sent back over. I mean, these are really integrated systems, and he's blowing it up. To what purpose?
Right.
Yeah.
Do you get the feeling much of not only Canada put up more of a resistance, but this whole world put up more of resistance to Trump than it seemed like he honestly thought was going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been some countries that have stood up more than others. I think the UK have been pretty lame. I gotta say it. I mean, while they were being taken off the shores of Dunkirk, we were already there manning the beaches with our young people. So we're kind of like, yeah, guys, we were there for you. Where are you? The EU, I think, has pushed back. And we're really, Canada's now talking a lot more to the EU. We're talking to the UK. We're talking to Australia, because we're having to think, how do we, these are democratic countries. We have things that we have to protect in common, and we're actually starting to see significant shifts in trade. Also, I think probably you'll see that with Latin America. You go into a grocery store in Canada, and suddenly you're seeing all this produce from Mexico and Peru that you never saw before. It's because
Hmm.
people aren't buying this stuff coming out of the U.S. because of the boycott. So, um, Donald Trump just didn't plan this out very well, and it's going to it's going to affect him.
Can we go back? Oh, did you have something you
Well,
wanted to
but
ask?
I a part of it is I suppose I refuse to give Trump that much credit.
Credit.
Is this all his plan, or is there a group of people around him that are doing this, or is he just kind of winging it every single day when he gets up?
Well, I mean, I, I read Bob Woodward's book War,
Uh,
that scared the hell out of me about, they were just trying to get stuff off Trump's desk in his last year so that he didn't blow something up.
exactly.
And the people that he denounced as the deep state were people who believed in the rule of law and the Constitution. I mean, he's brought in a whole gang of grifters, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
And like, look at Robert Kennedy Jr. It's a nightmare what's happening. The U.S. is the world leader. They're the front line in medical research, disease control,
Yeah.
immunization. Nobody's even else's can pick that stuff up. So when you send in someone like Kennedy to blow it up, what is the point? We don't know. I don't think anybody knows. So how much of it is just I did refer to him as a malignant narcissistic slug. I don't know if that was nice, but I said that on American media. Um, it's pathological, but it's also what happens when you let grifters and people who live by the power of the rage algorithm and the YouTube influencers decide policy. That's not how policy can be negotiated. That's not in the interest of anybody.
Right. I wanted to come back a while ago to just the vision of you moving from coffee shop to, I don't know, town hall to community center, and this grassroots movement of people actually getting off their couches and coming to hear you. And thinking about that, is there a tension between that? And we keep hearing one of the issues right now, and I believe it's true, is how online everyone is and how much misinformation and disinformation is being pushed, and how the right wing media, whatever form it takes, is swamping voices of sense. So I think the power of gathering people together in person is huge. But can we scale that up? Are you seeing that as what you're doing? How do we build on that, I guess, is my question.
Well, I think that is the definitive question. You certainly saw what happened in Canada when during COVID, when people became increasingly isolated from one another, and you ended up with the convoy occupation in Ottawa, which is a
Yep.
really psychotic, ugly um, thing where a lot of people who had previously no politics were basically occupying a city and demanding the overthrow of a government based on fears that this was somehow tied to the World Economic Forum and George Soros,
Hmm.
and microchips in the vaccines. and
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
and this was, yeah, I mean, this was there on the streets, and in the lead up to the convoy occupation, Facebook and X were flooded with fake bot pages.
Hmm.
And I see that now, now that we have the Liberal government coming in and we have this fake separatist movement in Alberta. My Facebook streams are full of fake pages trying
Right.
to really build rage and division.
Hmm.
It's very frightening. So I've been very concerned. I think to reassure Americans, listeners, that you're not the only crazy people in the world, is that we were sleepwalking towards disaster in Canada coming out of COVID. I think people were disengaged with one another.
Hmm.
They were really thrown off by the intense negativity of online forums. People who tried to speak their minds, they couldn't tell if it was a bot or their neighbor attacking them. And then when Trump came in, we woke up. We woke up out of this terrible lethargic sleepwalking because we saw what happened if we didn't deal with this. And so Canadians have been scrambling to find ways to engage. And we got to go back to those old forms of communication. You can't save the world on Zoom. I know we're on a podcast now and you're using the platform, but you've got to get out. You've got to start meeting people. And you got to start meeting people that don't necessarily have your worldview.
Mm-hmm.
They just care about making things better. And one of the amazing things in the rallies that I'm doing is the amount of people who are just real, so sort of salt of the earth people, retirees, vets,
Hmm.
people who small business, and they care about the country. So we start with something that we can all agree on.
Yeah.
And we divided ourselves into political silos, and I think it's one thing that my party, the New Democratic Party, did. I think it's one thing they accused the Democrats of having failed, is that we left behind a lot of people. So these community town halls and meetings is a way of bringing people into a conversation and giving them agency and saying, look, your neighbors are here. We're all good people at the end of the day, and get off the doom scrolling and get off the trolling.
And do you think
It's
that
also
message is breaking through as I talk over David, or he talks over me? Do you
Um,
think? Yeah.
well, again, I think the one upside of Trump is that he's been so toxic for Canadians that a lot of Canadians have stepped up and said, we can't let this happen. So that's
Hmm.
been good. But I think it's fragile. I think democracy is in a fragile place. And the
Hmm.
power of disinformation and the power of the Elon Musks is really a really dangerous thing right now. And
Hmm.
we've got to find ways to get back our democracies. And I think that's why I keep saying this. We got to go back to grassroots. We've got to get people engaged and going to community meetings and trying to dial down the blame and division and find ways of what brings us together.
Mm-hmm. The other challenge I find at the moment is breaking the algorithm.
Yeah.
Somebody at my place must have looked at wedding rings a little while ago, because I am getting flooded with ads for wedding rings, and I am not getting married. I have not been looking at wedding rings, but I just every time I see it, and I get 20 of them a day, I am reminded how the algorithms work, where the algorithm assumes you want something and just keeps feeding it to you and feeding it to you and feeding it to you. And even if you talk about trying to break out and trying to get away from it, the way the internet works makes it impossible
Hmm.
unless you go and Google something other than wedding rings. But I don't know what I could Google to get rid of all these wedding ring ads that are following me around. And news is the same way.
Yeah, well, what I find is that my political Charlie Angus resistance page is being swarmed by rage bots, picking fights with
Right.
people. And it's
Right.
when I got off X, I woke up the next day and felt like someone who must feel being sober for the first time after spending 2 years drinking rot gut whiskey. I felt so good getting off X and never went back. And Blue Sky, I'm on Blue Sky a lot, and there's great conversations, really interesting back and forth. I can post stuff and people will comment. Facebook, though, is where a lot of very ordinary people go, and
Yeah.
Zuckerberg, who's as toxic as Elon Musk in many ways, has let the dogs loose of disinformation. And it's going to get harder and harder to have those conversations because I go on in the morning and I just have to erase, block, block, block.
Mm.
And I don't care if they're real or not because I think at a certain point, people who even are real just act like a bot and bots act like real people. But what they're there to do is to break apart conversation. So, you know, we have to find ways to keep that conversation going. But Facebook, under Zuckerberg's latest changes, which was to please Trump, is making it very difficult.
Hmm.
But Blue Sky is so far it's still working. Every now and then, people, I've been waiting for it
Yeah.
to go down the dark hole, but the algorithms aren't set up the same way. So
Right.
because they don't have the algorithms set up the same way, and I don't think they allow all that many bots. But again, how do we have conversation without it being undermined and taken over by the rage hate?
Well, and I remember
Right.
when Twitter was the cool thing that everybody had to be on, and then all of a sudden one day it turned to evil, and I think a lot of us have been burned so many times on so many of these platforms that sure, Blue Sky might be the thing of the moment, but 2 weeks from now it could be suddenly the worst thing that's ever been existed. Now we have to boycott Blue Sky. So I think a lot of us just are leery of trying anything anymore.
Yeah, I agree, but I think we have to find ways to, to stay in communication. So, like, I started this Substack. I didn't think it would work. In fact, the story of how I started was kind of funny. I
Oh,
set it up, but then I screwed it up and I couldn't quite get it working. So then I forgot about it. And then my phone started ding, 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 ding at the end of January. And it was like, I've got a new follower and then a new follower. And I was getting a follower every 30 seconds for like five
wow.
days straight because people had heard my speeches. And so I called my resistance partner, Jan, who works with me. And I said, Jan, you got to figure out how we can get onto Substack thing. And she said, well, what's your password? I don't remember, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, I'm writing almost an essay a day.
Yeah.
Um,
Amazing.
it's full-time work. It's like I'm cramming and researching. And again, for a high school dropout who never read a book till the day of the exam and then read it on the way to school, uh, I'm trying to write about autocracy and autarky, which is the economic philosophy of fascism and our similarities to the 1930s and where resistance is happening and how to build resistance. And it's been a really great forum because, again, we're getting people from all over the world engaging in it and sharing. I don't want to just a one-way conversation. People are sharing their stories of how they're building resistance because I think we really need to encourage people right now to say, um, we can take back our democracy, but to take it back, we have to just get out there and start doing things, even if it's small.
Yeah.
Anything that brings two or three or four people together, that they build a link like that Tesla takedowns. I mean,
Yeah.
the number of people commented and said, I just didn't know what else to do. And I drive by this Tesla dealership and I thought, I'm going to protest there. But I've never done that. And I was terrified people were going to yell and honk at me and threaten me. And all these people stopped and came over and joined me. And then we went out for coffee. And now we formed a local Tesla takedown chapter. That's community organizing. That's old school organizing. And I think that that's where we got to get back to. And for the Dems abroad, just like in my party, we were all data. We worship the data. Well, I think we got to get back to building relationships.
Yeah, it's about connecting. And you're right. I have gone to a couple of Tesla takedowns here in Ottawa and also the Hands Off rally at the beginning of April. And they weren't new to me. I have protested before, but the number of people I met who had never done anything like it was astonishing and very encouraging. It is
Yeah,
attracting a lot of people
yeah,
who are like,
yeah.
got to do something, which is wonderful.
As a musician, tell you about your Substack. You must have enjoyed writing that article on Springsteen.
I was going to ask about Springsteen. There was a great article today with a drawing of him head to head with Trump.
Well, I was on Midas Touch the other night. Midas Touch has a big influence here in Canada. It's really interesting. The again, very ordinary people paying attention. And I said that we would love to invite Taylor Swift and the Boss to come to Canada as political refugees. But I didn't think it was right because the Boss and Taylor Swift are so American and they represent the best of America, and Trump represents the worst. So if they want to come over the border, I'm sure we'll make room for them, but I don't think they need to. I think they'll hold their own.
But they might like an invitation. We can ask them.
Yeah.
But just tell us about what Bruce Springsteen said. I mean, bring everybody up to date into the loop on what's going on because it's interesting. We talk about different ways to protest. Artists have a role and a voice.
Yes, and a voice.
Sometimes I hate it when an artist I love uses their political voice, and other times I think, well, finally.
Yeah, it's I mean, I'm not surprised that the Boss, it was in Manchester, he came out and he said, America, which was the beacon of liberty and hope for 250 years, has basically been taken over by a treasonous administration, and everyone needs to do their part. And then he sang "Let the Bells of Freedom Ring," and Donald Trump lost his mind and has been losing his mind ever since. So it tells you a couple things. One is like just the absolute toxicity of a sitting president who's attacking an artist because of his ego. But what also struck me is like, where are the other voices? We're talking about the disappearance of the rule of law, people being kidnapped. I'm not surprised that it's Springsteen that's speaking up because he really is in the tradition of Woody Guthrie, and he's in the tradition of
Mm-hmm.
Pete Seeger, and
Yeah.
he's always stood up on important things in a very simple and honest way. But I think one of the things that's really disturbed a lot of people is the people we expected to speak up didn't. Judges that we expected to do the right thing didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And,
The press, the law firms, a lot
the
of people have
press, the
just
law
caved.
firms,
Yep.
yeah, all the law firms that caved. I mean, right now Harvard's holding its own, Columbia caved.
Yep.
But I mean, those threats are coming over the border into Canada in a number of different ways. And if it's not held, if they don't hold the line in the United States on the rule of law, then interference in other countries becomes really possible. And I would say to your listeners, you know, it's hard. I get it, but it's a lot easier to stand up to fascism when it's still getting started than when it's entrenched.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
that's keep thinking of that, because right now we can. I mean, he was threatening Springsteen when he came back to the US. Like, we
Yeah.
can't, if he can threaten Springsteen, he can get away with doing anything. And
Anything.
that's why it's really important that we have the voices speak up who can speak up.
Absolutely.
But also think of
Another.
Trump as old, and there's no real polite way to say it. He's not going to be around that much longer. What do you think is going to happen, kind of, when you talk about the entrenchment of this, and somebody else comes along and takes over with that, because he's not going to be there much longer.
Well, I mean, all I can really think about is what Canada should and has to do, but JD Vance will be there. And he's been less than impressive. I mean, God, you got to be something special for the Pope to call you out by, you
By
know.
name.
Um,
Or the
but
pre-pope.
JD Vance did this post about how he was sick and tired of Canada's sob stories, he called it, about us being allies. It's like we lost a lot of good people in Kandahar.
Yep.
We had a lot of people lose limbs, a lot of people traumatized.
Yeah.
And those aren't sob stories. Those were people who went because the United States asked us to go. We didn't have to go to Afghanistan. So, JD Vance is scum in my books, and this guy could be president. Um, it's it is a concerning situation, and I think when I hear people say, "Well, we'll wait to the midterms," we can't wait to the midterms. The fight is now. The
Yeah.
fight to protect the rule of law, the fight to defend our communities, whether it's in the United States or anywhere, it's now. People have to stand up.
Yep. I don't know if that's a segue to the other thought I had a few minutes ago when we were talking about Springsteen, but something else that I've seen popping up in the press is the idea that punk is that a punk outlook is an antidote to where we are now. And there's several different voices who've been writing about this, and I wondered, since you have that history, if you have thoughts about that.
What is the punk outlook?
Yeah, living life as a punk rocker, a punk person. Yes. I
Well,
don't know, Charlie. Maybe it's meaningless, but yeah. What do you?
well, it allows me to do product placement. I've just written a book called Dangerous Memory,
Ooh,
Coming of Age in the Decade of Greed, and it is how the 1980s screwed this generation and set us up for the kind of toxic politics we're in. And part
yeah,
of it is part memoir of my days in the punk movement and organizing, but also the larger ramifications. And I think what punk taught me was the whole principle of DIY, do it yourself,
yeah, exactly. That's what I've
you
been
know,
reading about. Yeah,
Oh,
and
that's what you're talking about. Okay.
yeah,
yeah, and I mean, people always referred to me as the punk rock politician, even though I always wore a suit, because when you represent working class people, you show up for work in your uniform, which to me as a
yeah.
politician was my tie.
Uh-huh.
But I think I always had a bit of a punk attitude, which is that I didn't kiss anybody's ring. And I think we have to recognize that the power structures that are there are sometimes they're too comfortable and too polite to be able to actually say the threat that's we're facing, which is the threat of tyranny and fascism. And so we
Right.
need to speak up. And so maybe having that punk rock attitude is saying,
Hmm.
if you're not going to speak up, if you're not going to do the right thing, then it's going to be DIY. We're just going to have to take the reins and do it ourselves. And I think that that's where we're at right now. We've got to, the MAGA mob are not playing by any rules. They're not playing out of respect. They will do anything, say anything, distort anything, while everyone else seems to be playing this tired old playbook that simply doesn't cut it right now. So maybe a punk rock attitude is helpful. And Henry Rollins, a Black Flag, when Trump came in the first time, Henry Rollins said, "This is not the time to be dismayed. This is what Joe Strummer trained you for. This is punk rock time." And there have been days when I've been really down and thinking, yes, this is not the time to be dismayed. Joe Strummer trained us for this. This is punk rock time.
There you go. I knew you would be able to answer that question. That's awesome. Thank you.
Well, as a community activist, I mean, you must look at points in history, moments in the 60s, for example, and do you compare with what we're kind of going through right now with those other key moments? Is what we are going through worse? Is the world worse now that it's been in the time? Or is this this is our turn for a bunch of crap to happen that somebody has to stand up and fix?
Well, I think that, we were told by Francis Fukuyama that, the end of history, that, capitalism won, communism fell, and we didn't think that anything would replace it. Well, what can replace capitalism is oligarchy. And it happened on our watch. It happened with globalization. It happened with and where Trump feeds off the anger and the disintegration of the blue collar communities jobs were offshored. But I think the era that we're going back to is the 1930s. And I've been doing a big deep dive into the 30s. And one of the things Steve Bannon said that really scared the hell out of me, chilled me to the bone, was that he said this new era was going to be as exciting as the 1930s.
Oh, God.
And we remember what we do know about it. It wasn't very fun, was it? When giant tariffs drove the Depression, with the rise of fascism, the whole breakdown of trust and blame. But also there were times of real grassroots resistance. And, in the United States at the time, it was the New Deal. The New Deal was a model around the world of actually saying we actually have to get out of this. We're going to have to reinvest in our communities and have government play a positive role, not a negative role.
Yeah.
So, I'm a student of history, but we are definitely in very uncharted times right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Best songs for a resistance playlist. I'm in a lot of conversations where this comes up a lot. Let's build our resistance playlists. And who better to ask?
Okay, I'm going to do my other...
Your other product placement?
Well, it's actually not product placement, but I did run for the leadership of the New Democratic Party in 2017, and I came in second, which is another Trivia Pursuit question. Coming in second was the best thing that ever happened to me, my wife said. But I have a signed letter from Patti Smith giving me permission to use "People Have the Power" as my campaign song, and I think "People Have the Power" is something we really need right now. And Patti, that song, but when Trump came in the first time, I found I was playing it a lot, and it still means a lot to me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Wow. Anything else that you'd like to say that we haven't touched on?
Well, since I've retired, I'm back to touring with my band full time, the Grievous
wonderful.
Angels. Well, we're not full time, but we've got a bunch of shows. We're not crossing the border because we don't want to end up in an El Salvadorian prison camp. But my band Grievous Angels is on Bandcamp, and there's lots of. We got 9 albums. The last album is called "Last Call for Cinderella," album number 9, and we're just starting to work this summer on album number 10. So there's lots of stuff to do out there in the world.
Wonderful. And you don't have to cross the border into the U.S. to tour. There are people around the world listening right now who might want to have you somewhere else.
There you go. Well, the band's really driving right now. It's pretty
wonderful.
Cool. Yeah.
Fantastic. Oh, Charlie, this is such a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
If you live outside the U.S., please register with your voting state at votefromabroad.org every year. Do it now. And to find all our episodes, go to democratsabroad.org and look for us in the drop-down menu. I'm Rachel Oikster with David Schellenberg in Ottawa, Canada. Thank you for listening to Democrats Abroad, the Blue Vote Cafe.